Is depression an effect of identification? Yeah, okay. That's the talk. A little bit of a boring talk, a bit of, not talk, title, but we shall struggle on through it and try to make it interesting. Is depression an effect of identification? Basically, Lisa doesn't know. Hang on, what's that title? Forgot again. Effect of identification. I don't know what depression is on the whole. You know, lots of doctors and scientists say it's chemical imbalances in the brain. I can just tell you my experience of depression. I don't think I've really been the type of personality that experienced extensive depression, but moments of it. And particularly, and there was this period of a lot of emotions being released, this kind of exhaustion that couldn't be bothered to do things. And you maybe could call that a depressed energy, like it was exhausted, but it wasn't something that went on for too long. But one thing that I noticed is that when this energetic shift, was so dramatic, but this realization happened, is it was super energizing. It doesn't mean that I don't get tired, but it kind of really shifted that way of thinking. Like thoughts don't really appear of life is meaningless or life is depressive. It can appear that it's meaningless, but normally as a joke or in a conversation. Or maybe if I have to like scrub the kitchen floor, whatever, those types of things, but not really. Like not in the way it was before, or what's the point to life? Like it doesn't seem that motivation needs now, from this perspective, to come from a juicy story in the future. Like motivation just comes from motivation, and depression tended to contain a lot of feelings and thoughts which stopped me actually being active. And maybe that is kind of what depression is it's a depression. So rather than being active, you're depressed, like you're pressed down, like there's no air in you, there's no flair in you. So I don't know ultimately what depression is, but from my experience of this subject is that when this shift begins to happen, there is a newfound energy, because a lot of energy in the past went on to neurotic thinking or wrong thoughts or ideas. There was lots of blame or hatred or anger or revenge, whatever it was, or hopefulness, and that's exhausting for the body, and that can really exhaust and tire out the body, and then it can create like what's the point, what's the meaning, and this sort of depressed feeling in the solar plexus. My other experience with depression is that when I lived in an organization, which I'm not allowed to call a cult, but an organization actually who I think people there are really beautiful and I really like them. Their biggest effect on people when people went to stay with them or live with them for like a year or 2 years was people with chronic depression. They could completely get over their depression there, and that fascinated me. And they suspected, and I think so as well, the reason that is because they're forced into activity, and they're forced into positive thinking, and they're forced into being honest about what they think and feel, and they're forced into relationship. Whereas normally when people have depression in society, all those things tend to go, and people tend to isolate, quit their jobs if they can, go on benefits, like push everything away and try to isolate themselves. Whereas this was like the opposite, and it completely took people out of chronic depression, which chronic depression is said to be incurable. And I was super impressed by this, and I saw it, and I met people, like many people. And this is when I come across people with chronic depression, I always advise them or encourage them to like go and live in an ashram or an environment which forces them back into life. Because the feeling that makes you want to hide is actually the wrong feeling. You actually have to go out. It's like the opposite. So I don't think depression is an effect of identification as such, because ultimately I don't know what it is, and maybe there is this thing of genetic and chemical imbalances. But I do feel that identification exhausts a lot of energy. Like it really takes a toll on the body mind, because you're generating so many ideas and memes and belief systems and interactions in the world based on the belief that you're someone separate. And this is like running up the stream in a way, because it's the opposite to the way life is, like this belief that you're the doer and you've got to control your life. And also this strong belief in good and bad, that there is something called goodness and badness, and that you're guilty or they're guilty, or you're to blame or they're to blame. And that's important to establish in order to have a functioning society. But we spend way too much time on guilt and blame and shame and pride and expectation. These are teachings that Ramesh Balsekar and Roger Castillo teach. And they say that the effect of identification is these feelings. And I think these feelings to an extent are natural, and then they're meant to be there. You're meant to say this is inappropriate what you did, and so to put blame on other people. But that identification where you really believe it's true and you can't forgive or you can't get over something is exhausting for the system. And also a lot of the time when people are identified, their identity is trying to stay identified. So what it's doing is it's repeating stories about itself and repeating stories about its environment and other people again and again and again. And it's having these feelings and it's trying to run away from these feelings. And this in itself is exhausting. So you can see that all of these things have the potentiality to lead to depression. But I wouldn't be as far as saying that depression is an effect of identification. I ultimately don't know what depression is or why it arises. But what I do know is that identification is exhausting, or can be exhausting. I'm not drinking coffee if some people think this is why I'm really hyperactive. As I've aged, I've come to realize I can't drink any caffeine products. They don't do well for aging hormonal women. So if there's any other women out there that have hormonal problems, if they're getting towards 40 and their hormones are beginning to change, give up caffeine. It really has bad effects on your hormones. Yes. So I don't drink coffee anymore. It's really terrible giving it up at first. For about 3 weeks I had headaches. But actually once you give it up, you don't miss it at all. It's really an addiction. You completely forget about coffee. Or tea, or whatever it is you drink. It really helps setting an intention before the talk. I feel so excited to be talking with you guys and sharing everything I possibly can think of. And so also when I'm giving this talk, like listen to the words, but also like surf my energy as well. Like, what does that mean? It sounds quite weird. Like, imagine like little surfers on my arm and head and nose. But sometimes when you're watching videos, like people are speaking and they've got really dark and depressive energies. Like even if sometimes I watch psychology videos, and there's some psychologists that I really like, but their energy is so dark. By the end of it, I'm like, oh. And so also you can just like surf, like I feel really happy and bubbly and want to share with you, and there's like a energy that you can surf in that. You can kind of like resonate with it. So surf it. Yes. What else? Let's go surfing now, everybody's learning how. Come on, let's safari with me. Boop boop doop boop doop boop doop boop 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 boop. Let's go surfing now, everybody's learning how. Come on, let's safari with me. Everyone's like, what song is that? I know that song. That was my father's favorite song We weren't really allowed to listen to music in the car, but if we did, this is the songs we would listen to. What else can I tell you about non-duality? Maybe that's enough for tonight. I can't think. So if anyone's got any questions, you're welcome to ask it. If